All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Voices of Music Therapy podcast. My name is Brian Locascio. I am a board-certified music therapist. And for this week, our guest is a fresher music therapist out in the community. She's been in it for about a year and a half now. She specializes in areas of adults with intellectual disabilities as well as within hospice in her background. And I'm excited to introduce our guest for today. Her name is Emily Nordhues.
Hi.
And how did we meet for this podcast?
How did we meet? We met at KU, Rock Talk Jayhawk.
Yes, we met in school actually, which is kind of fun, and just it's always good to go back to your roots when it comes to podcasts. So I'm excited to have you on today.
Thanks. I'm excited to be here.
One of the first things I like to ask people when they come on to the show is, what is music therapy? So in your own words.
Yeah, so music therapy is therapy using music. It is the use of music to reach non-musical goals. So those goals could be something like healthy coping skills. We could be helping people in the hospital to reduce pain. And we do that using the medium of music to help accomplish those goals.
Yeah, as long as it's a therapeutic process. So whether that is through reinforcing the idea of healthy practices, of coping through playing instruments, or, sound quality is great. If we can go to the highest quality of sound, that's important to us. But that is not the focus, like Emily was saying. Right. All right. So, Emily, my second question for you is, what led you to music therapy? Or what was your journey to it?
I have always been involved in music ever since I was a little kid. And I started playing the piano when I was 6. Even before that, I did like kinder music classes when I was like a baby or a toddler. So I've always been involved in music in some way. And when I got into high school, I started thinking that I wanted to go into psychology. And then toward the end of high school, I took a music theory class, which was really cool that my school offered it. It was like the first year that my school offered it, and there were only like 5 or 6 of us that took it. And then I was like, oh no, I want to do music now. But everyone's like, you will not find a job if you major in music. But everyone was also like, you won't find a job if you major in psychology either. So I took one of those, like our guidance counselor had us take one of those tests where they answer all the questions about yourself and then it gives you what job they think it would be good at. And it gave me music therapy.
Really?
Yeah. One of them was art/music therapists. So, okay. The first time I took it, you would answer like 60 questions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we had one in my school too.
Yes. This is like a website. They've actually gotten a lot better over the years. They're fairly good now. And you ask these questions about yourself, and you could answer like 60 or so, and then it would give you a list, and then you could go through and you could answer even more to get a more refined list. So the first one that I got, my number 1, was a bereavement counselor. So counseling people who have lost a loved one, or maybe even like anticipatory grief. Maybe they're like currently losing a loved one to like a disease or something like that. I thought that sounded so depressing. And I was like, no, I will never do that. And then I did my internship in hospice. So maybe the test knew me better than I knew myself. But I took it again where I just answered more questions to get a more refined answer. Yeah. And music therapy was the number 1. It was art/music therapist. And so I was like, I've never heard of that. And the more I looked into it, it sounded like a good mix of psychology and music, which it is. Okay. And then I started, that was around the time I started touring colleges in high school, like sophomore, junior year, because I don't know, my school at least was very like, you need to start thinking about what you're going to do after high school when I was like a sophomore.
Was it college prep?
It was.
Yeah.
And yeah. So that explains that. By senior year, you pretty much they expected you to know what you were going to do, which was very stressful and I don't necessarily agree with. But luckily for me, it did work out. And I was touring the University of Kansas because my mom went there and we have family not far. And so we were visiting family and I had taken a tour of my dad's school, which is the University of Nebraska in Lincoln, which is also a very good school. And I was like, Mom, why haven't you had me tour KU yet? Because I'd been there for football games and that was it. But I hadn't seen any of like the school part. And so when my mom called to make the tour, they ask you, you know, like, do you want to tour for a specific major or school? And my mom initially said psychology, and then something made her go, wait, do you have music therapy? And does KU have music therapy? Yeah. So we had no idea. We actually had no idea that they had it as a major. And then I ended up touring KU specifically for music therapy, and I got to learn a lot more about what it was. And yeah, that's my very long explanation.
No, that's wonderful.
Of how I got into it. And I wasn't sure if I was going to stay in it because a lot of people don't entirely know what it is or what it entails when you go into it in school. We had a lot of people my freshman year, even after just one semester, that were not there anymore.
Yeah, it's pretty common.
Very common.
At KU, I think we usually start with like 45 or 50 students in the freshman class. So there's a lot at the beginning, or at least my class there were.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't know if there were that many in mine.
Like 30-ish.
30 something probably, yeah.
You know, throughout the coursework, it's so demanding, like psychologically, cognitively, and all the different like aspects of music that by the end, you know, it takes a very specific model of person to go through schooling in music therapy programs, not specifically at KU, but just all over, I would say. So whoever fits into that mold usually makes it through. But if you don't, it makes it a little bit more difficult.
I think we finished with 12.
Yeah, I think we actually did too. So 12 is the golden number, I guess.
I don't know if that's exactly right, but somewhere around there.
Yeah. So I think that's really important, though, that you talk about that, because I think that's a similar experience to many music therapists, is that coming in, you want to experience those, and that's what a lot of people are drawn to, that and helping people. So my question for you is, did you have experience volunteering with older adult populations or just volunteering in general with helping others prior to college?
Not a lot. Yeah, no. No,
that's okay.
Really. Not really. So we also, senior year of high school, had a week where they let us shadow someone with a job that we thought we would like. I think a lot of schools do that. And I was hoping to shadow a music therapist. There's only one music therapist that I know of in my town in Alabama. And it didn't work out because of like client confidentiality and stuff, which now also being a music therapist, I'm just thinking, yeah, that would have been such a mess to try and, get consent from all of those clients for a whole week's worth of people. And so I shadowed a music teacher instead. And that's the closest I did to anything music therapy related. I know that wasn't necessarily the question, but I really did not.
Yeah, but it still gives you an idea. And yeah, like we were saying, that is a similar experience to a lot of people, is not having the experience of seeing a music therapist professionally, maybe even until
well into college,
senior, junior year. They do get to observe undergraduates, but it's completely different when you see somebody who's been in the profession. So the next thing that I really wanted to ask you and was thinking about is, what does music therapy look like for you? You know, you went through school, you did the internship. Where are you now? Or what are the things that you're working towards?
That's a good question. That's a hard question. I'm enjoying a lot what I'm doing now. I work a lot with adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities, adults and children. That's hard because also COVID came and messed everything up. And so the last 6-ish months have been trying to kind of get back to normal, like a normal-ish schedule, and trying to deal with what the new normal has become, which is virtual stuff. That's kind of what I guess I'm focused on right now. And I feel like have gotten, it took a long time, but I feel like I've finally gotten the hang now of virtual sessions more, especially like my groups, because I do mostly groups, I would say. And that's been really hard.
Adapting to every one of those clients through virtual, I'm sure can be a journey. All right. And I'm thinking about, incorporating all these different aspects of your history, and we can tie those in as we go. But that actually brings us to our topic for this episode, and that is imposter syndrome and things to avoid in getting past barriers, kind of tying that into adaptations. And it's even harder to feel confident when you're thrown into COVID or thrown into this whole unknown world. So I kind of wanted to start by giving some background as to what imposter syndrome is. So going through some research in various databases, one of the articles that I found is by Adam M. Persky, and it's titled Intellectual Self-Doubt and How to Get Out of It. This is how they defined imposter syndrome within that. So they defined it as people who have imposter syndrome often feel like they are not as capable or adequate as others perceive or evaluate them to be. The signs and symptoms are feelings of phoniness, self-doubt, inability to take credit for one's accomplishments, and it is a form of intellectual self-doubt. Those with imposter syndrome are often intelligent and high achievers, like many academics, pharmacists, and professional students. One of the most interesting things I found while going through the research, since it's not diagnosed within the DSM-5, it's not considered an actual diagnosis or anything like that. So because of that, a lot of the research is limited in that area, even though its prevalence has been shown from a range of anywhere from 9 to 82% of the population. With such a large range, you think that we'd want to push out more research for this.
It was how much percent?
9 to 82%.
82%. That's a lot.
I think it's very common from my own personal experience and from speaking with peers at the beginning of careers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree.
I could see it being upwards of half of people going into a new career, a new profession. So that being said, I kind of wanted to talk to you about this idea of imposter syndrome. And I don't know, maybe you can just start by talking about your experiences.
Yeah, I hadn't heard of it until I got into college, and I don't really remember when I first heard it, to be completely honest. It became a lot more prevalent like junior and senior year, especially since we were doing practicum placements then. And I wish I could remember like the first time I heard about it and thought like, oh yeah, like I have that. I think that all the time, but I don't remember anything specifically. But it definitely was something that we ended up talking about a lot in school and college. And it was something that I very much identified with every time we talked about it. And I'm glad that we did, because I definitely would have thought that I was the only one that felt that way. So it was very good to talk with peers about it and know that it seemed like a lot or most of us also felt that way.
Yeah, absolutely. Did you feel like there was a shift in imposter syndrome from schooling, practicums to internship to the professional world?
Yeah, I feel like I didn't feel it terribly in internship, interestingly enough, just because I didn't feel as bad if I, made like a mistake or anything, because in my mind, like, oh, I'm just an intern and I'm learning and mistakes are how you learn. And I thought that like being an intern was almost kind of still like being a student, I guess, because I was still a student because I hadn't graduated yet. So I didn't feel it too much in internship. It was always kind of there, but it wasn't like really bad in internship. And then when I started working, it was very interesting because I did my internship in hospice, and immediately after I went to work at a private practice that involved a lot of populations that I have never worked with before or have very little experience in. Like maybe I had one practicum, I think. Trying to think of all my practicum sites. Yeah, I had one practicum with adults with ID, and that was it. And now that's pretty much all that I work with. And it was very interesting having not done my internship at the place that I work, and then having done an internship in a specific population that I'm now not working in at all. I definitely felt it very highly as I started, because it was such a learning curve of all of a sudden going into populations that I had not seen in a long time, or maybe even at all. And with other people that worked with me that had done their internship there and had all of the previous experience before they started working with certain populations or groups. So I think I definitely felt it the most in the transition to being a professional.
And it sounds like, from what I'm hearing, is that when you're going into totally new populations outside of your comfort zone, let's say, if that's safe to say,
yeah,
that's when it can arise even more. And, that kind of brings me, without getting too far off the path, to thinking about the populations that music therapists work with and how once you're board certified, you can work with any of the populations. But let's say you go through schooling and you only have one experience with adults for half a semester or first semester, and then one experience with kids, and then you're thrown into older adult settings or hospice. For you, how did you bridge that gap and learn that information that would ultimately lead you to being more confident in those areas?
So it helped that I was cross-trained first. So I got to see my coworkers leading the groups and see how they typically approach the sessions and what the clients were used to and what they enjoyed. And I kind of got to see get the dynamic of each site first. And that was really nice. That was really helpful. We have a Google Drive, our company does, of all of these different resources. And that includes past session plans and things that were used in session plans. And so that was something that I pulled from a lot within my first year or so. And then everyone that I work with is awesome, and they're all willing to, help me. They've always been willing to provide resources or answer any questions that I've had. And, so they've all helped a ton.
Yeah, I think it's very important that you say that, in noticing that there are resources. If you don't have resources within your specific company, let's say you work by yourself on a unit in the hospital, you can additionally find those resources through things like Facebook. I know there's quite a few groups, both regionally and within specific populations. So you might find those within pediatric music therapy or behavioral health music therapy groups, in addition to various research that you can find. So I think that's a great thing that your work provides for you, is those resources. And when I was looking at all the effects that I listed from earlier, some of those that came up were the potential for job dissatisfaction when you have this type of anxiety. And just as a note for everyone, this is linked to anxiety and depression as comorbid diagnoses that can come along with this. However, obviously, not everyone's going to experience all of those, but just to kind of give you an idea of the mindset that it's coming from, because when you're not feeling confident, you can get more anxious. When you're anxious for a long time, it's not uncommon to get a comorbid diagnosis of depression or anything like that as a result. Like I said, not everyone may experience that, but it's something to note. But one of the additional effects might be burnout. So I want to see, is it more taxing on you to have these types of imposter syndrome throughout, let's say, a week? Would it be more likely to lead to burnout in your experience?
Yes. Yeah, I think it does. Yeah. I mean, when you're just constantly self-doubting yourself, it definitely can. I want to make it very clear that no one that I know I talked about earlier, being maybe intimidated around the people that I worked with that had previously worked with all of these populations and everything. But no one, thinking back to it, everyone was so encouraging and so wonderful, and no one did anything to make me feel this way. It's just a weird thing that my brain does. It's a weird, self-sabotage little thing. But I could see people that don't have this and don't experience it, maybe listening to me say this and be like, oh no, what did I do? What did I say that made her think that? Nothing. No one did or said anything that to trigger it. I can't explain it. It's just a weird thing that my brain does. This annoying little thing that my brain does.
Yeah, and it's not something that you can control either, which I'm sure makes it even more irritating.
But no one is to blame for it.
Yes.
Other than my brain, I guess.
And that's an important note, yeah, for anyone else who's experiencing it either. It's not necessarily from your colleagues or from your professors. It could just be what it is, simply.
It is what it is.
So drawing it back to the research, like you said, it is very easy for that to become taxing on you. Imposter syndrome was first diagnosed or written about in 1985 by a psychologist named Clance and his partner Imez. And they first described it as a phenomenon, in 1978, and then wrote about it in their book in 1985. But since then, not a lot of research has been done. Within one of the studies, a meta-analysis of 65 articles. And within that, there was a huge variety of responses in the results. So for instance, it was originally believed to be experienced mainly in females because the time obviously skewed the data. But that being said, now it's some articles, about 50% say it's more common in females. The other 50% says it's equal to male and female. Other research has shown that it's more prevalent along minority groups. And within those, kind of linking those from anywhere from adolescents to older adults. So it's really common within all ages of life, which is very interesting. Mm-hmm. So I thought one of the great things we could do today is not only talk about imposter syndrome and what that looks like for us, but also talk about the ways within data and research that people have gotten over imposter syndrome. So this article that I'm going to be referring to is by Adam M. Persky, PhD, and it's called Intellectual Self-Doubt and How to Get Out of It, which I've referred to earlier. Mm-hmm. And it breaks it down into a 10-step process. So the first step is break the silence. So I think you're doing a wonderful job about that and coming onto the podcast. So in step 2, it says separate feelings from facts. So let's talk about that a little bit. So sometimes we feel like we aren't prepared for this, even though we do. Do you have a process of separating those two ideas from what you're being told inside your head versus the actual truth behind your experience?
Yeah, but going back to what I said about how no one ever said or did anything to make me feel this way, I basically have to say that in my head. What indication do I have that anyone thinks this way about me? If I'm feeling I'm just not good at this at all, I don't know what I'm doing. Has anyone given me any indication that that is the case? Or is that just me ruminating about maybe one thing in a session that didn't go as well as I wanted it to? What did my colleagues give me any indication of that? And the answer is almost always no. Did my clients give me any indication of that? And the answer is almost always no. That's been a really big thing, important thing for me of why am I thinking this? Taking a step back and being where is this really coming from? And usually it's just coming from inside my head.
Yeah, because it's a complete difference between getting feedback that's constructive and saying, hey, you need to work in this area, just improve and strengthen those skills, versus having that self-doubt. So that actually ties in really well to step 3, recognizing when doubt is appropriate. So can you give, for instance, our listeners an example of when feeling that doubt might be appropriate and not letting it overrun you?
No. I'm not sure I know what you mean.
So an example of recognizing when doubt is appropriate might be, like we were saying, transitioning into a new job where you haven't had that experience before. It's normal to feel doubt and to feel anxious about going into that population because, yes, the less experience you have in it, the less comfortable you're going to be. And recognizing that that is okay and that's not you not being capable, but that's a normal thing everybody experiences versus going into the exact population that you did your internship in and feeling that doubt.
Right. Yeah. And it's okay if I don't have as much experience going in. That's how everyone has to start somewhere. And maybe I've always accepted that you're going to make mistakes sometimes, and that's okay because that's how you learn. that's the best way to learn, I think. And just knowing that it's helping me to grow as a therapist.
I think that was very well put. Step 4 is accentuating the positive. So maybe, for every 10 things we do good, we do one thing wrong and we're like, I did one thing wrong.
That's the one thing you ruminate on forever.
Everyone relates to it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's shifting that focus. So for instance, when you're feeling that self-doubt, what's something that you can tell yourself?
Just thinking about how my clients react when they come to music, and they're always so excited to come to music and to do thinking now like virtually to the virtual groups. I get to see all of them participate, and I get to see how one of the things with virtual is now you don't really get to see the difference that it makes, but especially when I was going in person to the facility, I would see them before and after the sessions. And so thinking about seeing them before when they came in and then seeing the difference that music would make. So thinking more of like the long term and not just the short term of like, yeah, like maybe I did one thing wrong, maybe one thing didn't go as well, but think about how maybe my client's entire day was affected by the music, how it left them in a way better mood than before.
Yeah, absolutely. And that mood could have significant effects on them accomplishing their other goals throughout the day or the other therapies they have.
Yeah. Maybe they'd been having a meltdown before, or they'd just been having a really bad day. And I've seen music can really change that, really turn that around. And that's a very good feeling.
It's one of the many wonderful things about our careers.
We have such a cool job.
It's very cool.
Such a cool job.
Not to brag, but... All right. And thinking about that. And then there's step number 5, which is developing a new response to failure and mistake making. So instead of going into a mistake, it's so much easier said than done. And letting yourself and beating yourself up about it. What's different ways that we can cope within making mistakes that will help us be better prepared for the future?
Yeah. I like to have the mindset of it where mistakes are how you learn and grow, because I definitely didn't have that mindset before. And I used to get so upset anytime I made just any mistake, and it used to like really throw me. And now sometimes that still happens. Is still going to happen every once in a while. But yeah, I think changing the mindset of like, oh, well, maybe I made this mistake, or, I thought that this intervention was going to go really well and now it's not. But now I know how it will go, and I know how maybe I can tweak it in the future, or maybe I know not to do that anymore. Or, so we just kind of have to roll with it. And sometimes you have this wonderful, beautiful plan that seems so great in your head, and then you actually try to do it and it just does not work. And you just have to go, oh, well, all right. So we're just going to go ahead and do something else now. And we have learned from it. I think that's the biggest thing, is to have that mindset. That the shift in that mindset has definitely helped me a lot. Of like, well, at least now I know. That's kind of what I think. Now I know.
Absolutely. And I don't know if you do any like rituals or anything after you have a particularly difficult session, but I know one thing I like to do and ways to kind of cope and go through the process of understanding my mistakes is to actively write down something that I'm going to do different in the next session. Or I might take a breath and think, okay, what did I do wrong? But then what can I change? Like actively thinking myself through the next session and what I want to accomplish, or journaling.
Yeah, that's a very good idea. I don't admittedly do anything like that now, but I like that idea very much. Yeah. I'm not much of like I've never been one for like writing down things like that, but I wonder if I could find something kind of like that for me that would work.
Admittedly, I go into my notes
on your phone.
My phone, and
that works.
It's a quick type in when I'm in the car right before I drive.
Perfect.
It's a great way to do it, as long as they're locked. To be HIPAA compliant.
Right.
Just want to note that little one.
Yeah.
All right. And speaking of that, step number 6 is write the rules. Not to be mistaken with writing down, but to correct. Write the rules. So mistakes happen and it's okay to ask for help. We've kind of talked about that already. So I think it's a safe bet to go on step 7. Yeah. And step 7 is develop a new script. Know why you might feel in doubt. So are you feeling in doubt because of, like what we were saying earlier, are you feeling in doubt because this is a new population? Are you feeling in doubt because you messed up in the previous session? Not only speaking about imposter syndrome will help, but also realizing why you're feeling it. Because once you know what's causing it, then you can begin to address that.
Yeah.
And step 8 is visualizing success.
Ooh.
Which sounds really fun and spunky or whatever. But I think it's much harder. It's easier said than done.
Right.
So I know a lot of people have experience with this, maybe in sports or something. That was identified within the article, was that the writer mentioned when they were on soccer as a kid, they always said, visualize yourself winning and scoring the shots. Anybody who's familiar with sports is used to this. But for you, have you taken the time to visualize success, let's say within a therapeutic situation?
I guess I don't know. I've never really thought of it in that way. I just always remind myself, I think of more of like past, maybe not past successes, but like, I guess you consider like past successes to be current successes, if that makes sense. Just thinking of how my clients are satisfied with the groups that I'm doing. And I know that because just thinking of kind of using it as evidence, like, well, they've, really liked it in the past. So I have no indication that they're not enjoying it now. Yeah. No indication that I'm not doing a good job now. And so I guess just thinking of it as kind of a continuation of, so I guess in that way I do. Yeah. Thinking, yeah, it's going to go fine. Just like it always does is kind of how I think of it.
And that sounds like it's part of that evidence-based practice. Speaking about tying that in, using the evidence from your past successes and applying that to your future. So my question is, going into a session, how do you feel going into it? Are you visualizing that success? Are you like, this is going to be a great session? What's the mental thought behind that?
I think the beginning of sessions are always when those thoughts want to creep in the most, of like, oh man, oh no, here we go. This is going to suck. But then but then I always have to be like, shush. No. And that kind of, I'm a very just like, just go with whatever, go with it type of person. And knowing that it always works out. It always does. And again, just trying to think of, it's always worked out in the past. And so I have no indication that it's not going to work out now. And so pretty much right before I start, I do have to think of like, yeah, this is going to be fine. And I know it's going to be fine because it's always fine. And maybe parts of it won't be fine or great. But again, going back to what we said earlier, that's how we learn. And then we can make the next one even better.
Yeah. And even the best music therapists in the entire world have had those situations. Yeah. That is not something unique to people just coming in.
Yeah.
Messing up is normal.
Yeah. And thinking of like, I do like some of these groups I do weekly, or I'll do them multiple times a week. Like no one's going to remember if you had one bad session. No one's going to remember if you had like 10 good sessions and one bad one. Maybe you are going to focus on the one bad one, but no one else is. Yeah, except you. Maybe you'll focus on the one bad one, but that's not the one that your clients are thinking of.
No, they're thinking about all the fun times you sang YMCA or something like that.
Yes, I do YMCA all the time. They love it.
It's a fan favorite.
It is.
So when all those wonderful things happen, let's say you get compliments. So step number 9, reward yourself and accept those rewards. So after a session, you might get a compliment from the nursing staff or something like that. Try not to dissuade them from it or be like, no, it's fine. Take some time to enjoy those compliments and to accept them, because they did say them to you for a reason. And even if you do feel like they don't necessarily like know how, like the classic, like how good it could be idea is what I like to think of. Let's say like a therapist who's been doing it for 30 years versus somebody who's been doing it for 2. That doesn't mean that your session wasn't great. And sometimes that person with 2 years of experience can have a better session. That's not like a crazy concept. So just really taking time to accept those compliments.
Just because there are people that could do it better doesn't mean that you didn't do well also.
Yeah. Absolutely. You don't always have to get the gold medal to be a contender. You can quote me on that.
Okay.
And it brings me to number 10, which is one of my favorites. Fake it till you make it.
Oh, yeah.
As long as you present yourself confidently, nobody else is going to question it.
Yeah. It's almost kind of the thinking it into existence or talking it into existence kind of thing. Yeah.
So really just focusing on all the wonderful things. I hope these 10 steps were helpful to our listeners. And Emily, I hope that
they were helpful to me.
Helpful to you?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Love it. So yeah, I'm glad that you enjoyed it and that was helpful. And I do want to tell people some assessment skills that they might want to use either for themselves or for clients, if you think you have clients who have imposter syndrome. Within the 65 articles of the meta-analysis that I mentioned earlier, there's 3 main forms of assessment scales, although there were several others that were just in lower frequency. But the first is the Clance imposter phenomenon scale. And it's a 20-item scale on a 5-point Likert scale. So it should be pretty easy for anyone to take. I'm not sure about the accessibility of that, so you would have to check online. But then there's also the Harvey imposter phenomenon scale, also known as the HIPS. And there's 14 items on that, and it's on a 7-point Likert scale. And lastly, there is the Leary imposter scale. So perhaps in the notes section of this podcast, I will link those in and you can check those out. Cool. But Emily, I do want to thank you for coming on to the show today.
Thanks for having me.
It's been a pleasure.
It's been so difficult. Our schedules just never match up. We never see each other ever. It's just been so hard to get a hold of. Yeah.
For context,
everyone, we live together.
We do live together.
And we're quarantined together at the moment, so we see each other all the time.
Which is why I was like, this is the perfect time to have you on my podcast.
Perfect.
However, I will say we're living at different places right now because I'm cat sitting for a friend.
Yeah.
So,
So I did have to travel to you, which felt strange.
Which is dedication. And I want to thank you all for listening, as always. You can stay tuned next week for another episode of Voices of Music Therapy. And thanks. It's been a blast.
Thanks, everybody.
If you'd like to see today's guest or learn more about the show, check us out on Facebook or Instagram at Voices of Music Therapy or on Twitter at VOMT Podcast. If you have any questions or if you know any innovative music therapist and would like to recommend them for the show, you can email us at voicesofmusictherapy@gmail.com.